that first deal I did with the Dominican hitman, my partner from in the city came with me. His name's Jerry McAleer. He retired as a SAC up in New Jersey. Good friend, still talking to him to this day. And I'm stressing about this first undercover. And he goes, "You ever lied to a broad in a bar?" "Yeah." "Same thing." "Okay." So, and that's something that was always in the back of my mind as I'm dealing with these guys undercover. I'm like, it's just like lying to a broad in a bar, you know?
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
My name is Stephen Whipple. I've spent almost 36 years as a special agent with DEA, signed a bunch of different posts and finished up here in Houston.
And what was your last title here in Houston?
I was very fortunate to have served as a special agent in charge here for my last year and a half, 2 years.
Okay. Steve, can you tell me a little bit about growing up, family life, and ultimately, was there something that led you to law enforcement?
I'm blessed to be here in the first place. I grew up in West Texas mostly. I was born way out in far West Texas and lived around Dallas some. Lived in the Middle East for a few years in Iran. My stepdad was a geologist by trade, and so we lived where oil was. And so I sort of finished up growing up around the Abilene area. It's where I went to high school. Just sort of that average kid, you know. Didn't hang out with any particular group. Learned to drink beer on a dirt road, you know. I'm fortunate to have survived that. Went to college in Abilene and grad school in Abilene. My family it's quite a diverse set of folks. I've got a big chunk of them that were Southern Baptist preachers and teachers who had a profound impact on me. And then people in oil business, you know. So, you know, my stepdad, my grandfather's tough old cuss, came up the hard way, and I ended up retiring as a regional production superintendent for a major oil company. And
how old were you when you were in Iran?
So when we got there, I was 11 or 12. 12, and when we left, 15. And so we lived in Ahwaz first, which is down in the southern part of Iran, the oil-producing region. And then the second, not quite half of that time, was in Tehran, the capital. My stepfather had started his own company up at that point, and he had a contract with the Iranian government for the Iranian Atomic Commission. Back during that time, the president at that point was Jimmy Carter, and he had signed an agreement with the Shah to provide a peacetime nuclear reactor. So his job was to locate uranium deposits as well as a seismically stable area in which that could be built. I always wondered why nobody ever came and talked to him later in life, because he knew a lot of stuff about that program. Things started going bad, and we had to get out. Came back, settled back in West Texas. He lost everything over there.
But up until the time that you were living in Iran during an age where you probably remember. How was it up until the time where things went bad? Did you like?
I loved it. It was a blast. Lived in Ahwaz. I used to hitchhike from the house to go out to the baseball fields, and I'd get picked up by an Iranian. You're from Texas, Steve McQueen, John Wayne, you know, and they liked us. And the Iranian people, and a lot of them prefer to be called Persian. They're fantastic people, and it's a shame what's happened to that country. They've been hijacked by a religious far right wing Islamist, the Shiite, and that has stifled that country and those people. Every now and then I'll run into an Iranian and I'll hear some Farsi, or I'll snap on the accent and we'll talk. and they're heartbroken about what's going on, and they're praying for a new revolution to bring in a secular government. The Shah, he was a dictator, and he had Savak. You didn't talk bad about the Shah because Savak come knocking on your door, you know. But he was modernizing the country. Girls were in school, roads, infrastructure. Yeah, he lived a wealthy lifestyle, you know, and his son, the crown prince, you know, was flying helicopters at 15 years old. And, you know, and so, yeah, they had all the issues of a dictatorship, but he was also doing a lot for the country. Yeah, it's a shame what's happened there. And I watch the news, you know, like everybody else does, and hope and get all excited when you see the protests, and well, maybe, you know, maybe they'll have an impact this time.
Getting back to you, at what age did you realize you wanted to go into law enforcement? And what was it? Was there something in particular that led you there?
So I got out of high school in 3 years because some of my high school was overseas and it was very advanced. I went to college, and when I was 17 when I left the house and really never went back, other than just, you know, holidays. Did the same thing for undergraduate. Got out in 3 years because I'm focused. I'm spending my own money. I'm doing it myself, and I want to get through this. And when I graduated, I was looking at law school. I got accepted into a couple of good law schools, but not the one or two that I wanted. And I had a friend who was in an MBA program there at another university, and I went and talked to them, and they offered me a grad assistantship. I was looking at that. Also talked to the Marine Corps about flying, and went through their assessment process and took the test. And they treat you really good when they're looking at you. And one of the last things they did, they measured my femur and said, "Sorry, kid, you can't fly jets, you know, but we can guarantee you," because at that point in time they would guarantee you jets as long as you passed everything. And they said, "We can't do that. We can put you in helicopters or some of our," I guess what the colonel said is, they called it a trash hauler, the big, you know, fixed wing aircraft. And I said, "No, I'm going to stick with going on to grad school or law school or something."
Wait a minute. What's the deal with the femur? What?
My femur was too long to fly a fighter jet.
Really?
Yeah. He said, "You punch out, you lose your knees."
Didn't even know that.
I don't know what kind of bird they were talking about at that point.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember what their primary fighter jet was for the Marine Corps. It surprised me, you know, because I said, "I've seen tall guys before that they're, you know, flying jets." And he goes, "Yeah, well, you're sorry." Yeah, they had me sit in a chair and set at right angles, and they measured from the tip of my knee to the back of my ass, and yeah, it was too long. So,
Wow.
yeah, it surprised me. It really did, and it didn't come up until the end when the CO of this squadron, they I was meeting him, and he called this guy to come in and hey, let's do this measurement now because he looks pretty tall and he's long-legged, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's how that happened.
Huh. Okay.
So I had this idea I wanted to serve, and and with the idea that okay, I'm probably going to go to law school or something like that. But since that what I really thought would be a cool way to serve didn't happen, so I had to make a decision. So I went to grad school and to get my MBA, and it was between working plus the grad assistant and everything. As I'm doing that, and I still want to do something to serve. And I'm thinking, okay, but I'm going to get in oil business. That was my long-term plan. I'll go do this 5-6 years, maybe 10, then come back, go have fun, and then come back and get in business. So I'm dating a young lady at the time, and her father was the elected DA of a county in the area, and he and I got pretty close. And I had started an application process with the Dallas PD, and this was in my third semester out of the four for the graduate program. And he says, "Well, why are you doing that?" He said, "You know, you're about to get an MBA. Why don't you look at something where you go directly into investigations? You know, look at something on the federal level." Because he had actually done that. He'd been a federal agent, gotten his law degree, and gotten out and, you know, gone the DA route and got elected. He's a long-time DA. And okay. And he says, "Figure out what you want to do and just do some research." So, you know, I'm looking at stuff, and this was after the Judge Wood murder happened. And that was a DEA case out of El Paso against the Chagras. I thought, man, that's interesting. These guys are fighting a fight, and this all the Miami crap's going on, and the cocaine cowboys and all that kind of stuff. And I said, you know what, that might be an interesting job to do for a few years. So that January of '85, I sent my application into the Dallas office and got a call, and I went and interviewed, and they said, we're going to recommend you. And so I started the process. And again, the whole idea is I'll go do that for 5-6 years. I can go about anywhere. I just don't want to go to New York. And so I did that. And back then the Bureau did our backgrounds, and went through that process and got it done pretty quick. And actually in early September, they called and offered me the job. And I'd already graduated, and I was working for a small oil company. I said, hey, look, I'm sort of integral to this small company. I just can't leave. They wanted me to, this was like on a Monday, and they wanted me to show up in Dallas on Friday to get on a plane on Saturday or
typical.
Sunday.
Yeah.
And I said, I got to give them at least 2 or 3 weeks. So they pushed it off. So in October of '85 is when I hired on in Dallas.
Okay, so you go to the academy.
Yeah.
Do you, back in the day, so it's '85 when you're back there, '86 when you actually end up getting assigned. Do you get to pick, or are they telling you where you're going?
So a couple different points. They ask you, hey, what's your wish list? The first time it's 3 places, then it's 5, then it's 2. You don't know what's coming. I'm putting stuff. I'll go to Miami. I'll go to Oklahoma City. I want to go to Dallas. All these different places. Nothing to do with the East Coast, far or Northeast. And I was in basic agent class 42, so we were the 3rd class to go through Quantico. Had I hired on when they wanted me, I would have been in 39, which that was a nightmare class from what I understand. They really had a hard time because that was the first class to show up there, and they lost about half of those students.
Wow.
And so I'm in 42, and at week 6, a suit from DC comes in, stands up in front of everybody, and he's got his sheet, and he starts alphabetical. Joe Blow from Oklahoma City to Miami, and he just reads down the list. Whipple, I'm next to the last. My roommate sets on, he is the last, Dave Williams. And they get to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm hearing a lot of guys going to Miami. There's some LA, some San Diego, there's 2 girls going to San Antonio, in my class. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Steve Whipple from Dallas to New York City. I didn't even hear where my roommate got. I was in such shock. Dave, he went to Miami. So they said, if you want to see us, this was right before lunch. We're going to be around this room over here. Come see us. And I look over, and there's a Campbell. I can't remember his first name. Sitting over there, just dumbfounded shock as well. He's black guy, and they're sending him to San Diego. And I said, Campbell, what's wrong? He goes, he's from Jersey. He goes, I don't want to go to California. I don't like it out there. I've never been. And I said, well, I sort of feel the same thing about New York. Hey, you want to see if they'll flip-flop? Yeah, let's go. So we go hand in hand. We go up to the room and say, hey, guess what? We've got a deal for you. And, and you're laughing. And that's exactly what this suit from headquarters, for all we know, he's the administrator, And he goes, no, we need a black guy in San Diego. Bye. And so I'm like, I just go and I sit in the cafeteria in Quantico. I'm just in this day like I've never quit anything in my life. I said, okay, I'll finish BA school. I'll go back to Dallas and I'll turn in my badge and credits. I am not going to New York City. Not me. I'm a West Texas boy,
Yeah.
So the oldest guy in our class was a guy named John Plover. Fantastic individual. He'd been in NIS before. And he did a huge, big undercover sting in Philly. He had been, I think he'd worked narcotics in New York before. He's an old New York guy. And he says, come on, kid. Mir, we're going to go to the boardroom and have a cocktail. We're going to talk about this. Okay, John. I was the next to the youngest guy in my class. There was one guy who was 22. I turned 23 in BA school. So we go up there, and he convinces me, hey, just go. Leave all your stuff out there in West Texas. Because if you leave within a year, they're going to make you pay back. So just leave it for a while and see if you can do it. And he convinces me to go. That drive, that 1,605-mile drive from Dallas to New York City was the longest drive of my life. I can't tell you how many times I thought about stopping and finding the nearest DEA agent and give my badge and gun and going back home. So I get there. I get there on Monday morning, and I'm driving in through the Staten Island Way and go over the Verrazano, and I look over and I see the Statue of Liberty off to the left, and the southern tip of Manhattan and the financial sector. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty neat. It's a beautiful morning in April. And I get off and I get on the Belt Parkway, driving my F-100 pickup with half of what I own in the back of it. And I'm not on there a mile, and one of New York's finest pulls me over. I'm not speeding. Roll down my window. Howdy, officer, what can I do for you? He goes, you can't be on this road. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, this is a commercial vehicle. I said, oh, no. I'm a DEA agent. I'm reporting for duty this morning. That's all my personal stuff. Kid, you don't understand me. Get off the fucking road. This is a commercial vehicle. I'm like, officer, I don't even know. Get off the road or I'm going to write your ass. Yes, sir. I pull off that exit. I literally almost broke down in tears. Like, I don't want to be here. This guy don't want me here, you know? And I'm like, okay. I sat there and I look around, no cop, screw it. I got back on the belt and went on about my business and reported. But that was one of what I thought one of the hardest moves I ever did.
But the work in New York has got to be great. Once you, at what point do you go, I'm staying, this is great?
I don't know that I ever said that. They put me in an all New York group, all New Yorkers, including my future wife. And here I was, this hick from West Texas, showed up wearing cowboy boots and jeans. I wore boots until a guy outran me once. And I didn't wear boots at work much anymore after that because I couldn't get my traction. Anyway, they busted my chops and I busted their chops. And I let them know what I thought of New York. And, you know, it's a god-awful place. And you don't know what heaven is until you've been out in West Texas. I mean, it was pretty intense. My wife couldn't stand me. She thought I was an arrogant Texan. I thought she was an arrogant New Yorker too. But later on, we sort of figured that out. But so yeah, I was in the seaport detail there. We worked Colombian cases. I got exposed to probably two of the finest investigators I'd worked with. Top 5 in my whole career. Artie Anderson was the 13 that led us, and Ed Senecal was just getting his 13, which was a big deal back then. Anyway, got exposed to wires. I was the rookie. I was the pen guy. I would go down and pull the pen tape, those little blue machines with the long tape, 3x5 cards, you know, get subscribers, do surveillance. And when I'd be sitting on surveillance, nothing happened. I'm working on my pen register stuff. It was a good training ground. They ended up moving me into Manhattan. While I was there, I applied for Snowcap. Again, I wanted the hell out. I thought, hey, that'll be fun, you know. And when the first teletype came out in early '87, I went to my boss and asked him if I could go. And he had served in Vietnam, and then, of course, we had to go to a bar and talk about it, and, you know, about what it is to be in the jungle and all that kind of stuff. And he approved it. And then I had to go see my ASAC, still one of the most fantastic ASACs I ever had, Joe Vanacora. He approved it. And I was going to be in the first wave, and I lost a half-sister to a car wreck, and so had to do the funeral thing, and then was in the third wave of guys going through training.
Okay, so for the audience who doesn't know what Snowcap is, can you talk about what it is?
So Snowcap initially was an idea, and even when they kicked it off, it actually started out as blast furnace when they sent some guys TDY down to Bolivia to target the cocaine production facilities in Bolivia, and it was really successful. So they said, hey, we're going to do this thing called Snowcap. And when they started, they had one GS-14 staff coordinator running it. And you'd call him and he would say, I don't know. So we used to nickname him Yo No Sé. Anyway, so they were going to expand it outside of Bolivia to other South American countries that would target the production processes as well as the infrastructure by which they would move the cocaine paste or the cocaine hydrochloride in country, out of country, and north. So you had interdiction efforts on riverine. We had pipeline efforts on highways. You had elements of it that were out looking for labs and going out and destroying labs, destroying airstrips. So you can think about all that stuff that goes into it. They built the initial training program to give us some good training, a lot of exposure. We could have used more for those kind of elements on what we would need.
But you're 23, 24 years old. What appealed to you about that operation? How did you know, okay, this is, because you know how it typically is. We're going to start up this new thing and nobody really knows what it's about. So what sold you on that program?
I was stupid. And the teletype, some brilliant guy in headquarters wrote that teletype. I said, oh man, this is like, you're going to be out in the jungle fighting bad guys and blowing up labs and airstrips. And so that sounds like some cool shit. And it gets me the hell out of New York, So yeah, so I raised my hand. And they sent us to our first go around. Our first element of training was to Spanish language school, which was with Border Patrol at FLETC. And it was 6 weeks of 8 hours a day, in a class of like 40 of us.
Wow.
And went through that. And they sent us to Quantico, where we got a lot of great land nav. Got a little bit of explosives and a lot of heavier weapons, the M60, the M203 grenade launcher, automatic weapons, stuff like that. Then some really good training after that was Fort Sherman down in Panama, jungle operations training. And some of the most miserable times of my life being out there, because there's some shit in that jungle that'll hurt you, But fantastic training. We learned that navigating in the beautiful forests of Quantico is nothing like being in triple canopy, jungle trying to navigate in there where you're trying to set an azimuth off 3 trees down, Anyway, and then after that, some of us went into the riverine program as well, and I did that, and that was 2 weeks at NAS New Orleans with Small Boat Unit 22, which was, it was a reserve unit and had some reserve SEALs in it, and it's some really interesting training. That was in February '88, and yeah, we spent a few days in the classroom and the rest of the time out in the field, we're driving Boston whalers around. And
do you ever look back on, you get into DEA, you got no law enforcement experience.
Green.
Then you start this Operation Snowcap. Do you ever look back and go, wow, that was some pretty interesting stuff that I was doing at 23, 24 years old?
It was, and I do. And, and the Snowcap thing, it's all kinetic kind of stuff, right? And in DEA, we've got sort of two different parts to us, for lack of a better term. You got those who really want to be the kinetic guy, they're on the SRT, or they're doing a lot of buy busts and stuff like that. And then you got the investigators that just fry everybody with the cases that they build, and just fantastic stuff. And at 23, 24 years old, I was enjoying the kinetic stuff, but I'd been exposed to these two brilliant investigators, and I'm like, man, that's some pretty cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I do 2 tours down in South America, and because of the riverine, I was sent to Ecuador, and we stood up a unit, and we trained them and got all that going, and had a conversation. And now we're moving forward some time. Had a conversation with my wife.
But wait, before you move on, what specifically did you do? You did 2 tours in Ecuador. What did you end up doing down there?
So a lot of training.
Okay.
First tour we got down there, we were told we had Boston whalers that were there, and there were 3 water taxis that State Department had bought and spent, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars on these fiberglass hulled. You see them; they're long, skinny boats that you could take a screwdriver with and hit it hard enough, and you'll punch a hole in it. Versus these Kevlar-lined whalers that we had trained on and that we had in Bolivia in the riverine program down there. That fully loaded with Kevlar, and they had an M60 on the bow and on the aft, and you ran with a crew of like 8 guys. It strapped to like 36 inches, and when your prop was all the way down. But and then we had all these, what were they, 400 horsepower Yamaha engines. They expected, and we had to put all this stuff together. And they expected us to put 2 of these things on one of these, which it just would have never worked.
Yeah.
And we had to have the transims reinforced just to manage the one. We spent that first 90 days training and getting stuff put together. And so Navy gave us a detail of, there were like 2 or 3 mechanics. There was a SEAL, 2 SEALs on it. And so we were training, and everything from weapons and tactics, as well as just getting these boats working. We did a couple of deployments with some Zodiacs up in the Lago Agrio area, which is northeastern Ecuador up on the Colombian border. And a very interesting area. It's an Amazon basin. It's on the other side of the Andes from the coast. But up there you had oil people, you had communists, the terrorists that were trying to get away from Colombia for a little R&R, and pygmies. Guys running around in loincloths with blowguards. I kid you not. We ran into them in the field. And then up there you had the Ejército, the Ecuadorian army. And we ended up hooking up with a major there who would go out on these 30-day LERPs looking for the communists and killing communists. And he said, "Oh yeah, we see traffickers up here all the time." That's the other element you see up there. He wanted us to go out on that, and we we're like, "Ooh, that 30 days might be a little bit long, So we ended up not doing that, but we did some ops up there. We didn't get anything, but it was more of a training kind of thing.
Okay.
Went back the second time. Then we did deployments along the southern border, intercoastal waterways. We went up to Esmeraldas, did some deployments up that way. Went back up into the Lago Agrio area again, and it was all interdiction stuff. There were new laboratories that we found or anything like that.
Okay.
That was an interdiction program
there. Okay. So now, getting back to New York, you're dating your wife.
Okay.
What ends up happening?
We got married.
Okay. Oh, you get married in New York.
Yeah, we got married.
Okay.
And I'm in between tours and Snowcap tours. We had a conversation going to the airport, and it became real clear I needed to make a choice between my family and Snowcap. And that's one of the few times in my life I made the right decision. I did that tour, and I asked to get out. And they said they let me go, but I kept getting calls for the next 5 years to deploy. So I did that last tour, came home at Christmas, and got back into Group 23 in Manhattan on 57th Street. Worked for Andy Sherbein. He was something else as a boss. Matter of fact, a bunch of us got together here this last summer for his 80th birthday, and we all went up to Massachusetts, and he had no idea it was for him. He thought it was just guys getting together from Division 20 in New York, and it was for Andy. And I looked around, I was like, holy crap, look at all the SACs. There's a former assistant administrator, all the ASACs and GSs. Everybody there worked for Andy at one point.
Wow.
And fantastic boss, taught me what servant leadership really was, because he just lived it. He's the guy that, we'd take down. We'd work 24, 48 hours straight, had a cooperator that we needed to keep out and not take to jail that night. He goes, I'll keep him in the command post. We'll handcuff him to the bed. He'll be all right. You guys go home and get some sleep. That was Andy Sherbein. He'd do that kind of stuff all the time. So anyway, I go to Andy's. I'm in Andy's group. And I guess I need to get this investigator side down, and try to do some real cases. Blessed, a couple of different ones fall in my lap. Big CCE case I was able to make sort of on a historical basis, and then a wiretap case. My first wire was very successful, Dominican heroin wire. And I had a partner that had done one before, and he'd just gotten his 13 and had a really interesting perspective. Everybody's just afraid to do anything when they're up on phones. We don't want to burn the phone. He goes, we'll just write a new one. So we were out there stealing dope and money from these bad guys, just having a blast doing it. They had no idea what was coming because we'd take something and they'd talk about it on the phones, you know. Matter of fact, my second phone I wrote on that was a bag phone. Early cellular phones, it was actually bag. And it was the first wire that we had done in DEA where we didn't have to use a Cushman and follow them around and be on the same cell site. We could monitor it from the office on 57th Street. And they ran, and we lost some of the, I forgot if we lost cellular, or there was one connection that the company couldn't figure out how to provide, but we got everything else. And we thought, man, this is really cool, you know? So it was pretty neat.
So how do you end up in El Paso?
So first thing comes, vacancy comes open in Guayaquil, Ecuador. And I know the rack down there. He calls me, hey, Steve, put in for it. It's yours, you know, kind of thing. So Ruth and I talk. She says, yeah, okay, put him. So I put in. And I get a call from the 14 and agent assignment saying, hey, Steve, I'm about to send your name up to the deputy administrator for the section in Guayaquil. This is a couple months later, right? So on a Friday, she says, you still good with that? I'm like, I need to talk to Ruth. She says, yeah, because this isn't a big enough office for a married couple. I said, yeah, I was afraid of that. It's like with a rack and fork kind of thing, I think. And so I go home, we talk about it on the weekend. She don't want to quit. And I get that, okay. So Monday morning, I call the agent assignment person. I said, I may be shooting, and I'm crying because this was my exit out of New York. And I may be shooting myself in the foot, and please tell me if I am, but Ruth doesn't want to resign. And so I need to pull my name. I said, am I dead? Am I here the rest of my life? She goes, oh, no, don't worry about it. She goes, I'll just put number 2 on him. We won't tell Mr. Green anything. Okay. And she goes, hey, Ruth put in for Epic. Is she still interested in that? I said, absolutely. She said, okay. She goes, she should hear something in a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks later, Teletype comes out. Ruth Whipple going to Epic. And she said, oh, by the way, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to Epic? I said, no, I'll go to the RO there. And it's funny because the SAC, when I had come through earlier, he was still the SAC. He tried to get me, he asked me if I would go for it to undo my transfer to New York and send me to El Paso. I said, sign me up, boss. I'll go to El Paso any day over. And he couldn't pull it off. But anyway, so I said, yeah, just put me in the RO. That'd be great.
But the funny thing is, your wife doesn't know any. She's from New York. She doesn't even know. So how did she end up putting in for El Paso?
Well, she put in for it because they had a vacancy for 9 slots there. And we knew we wanted to get out of New York. We were in a 1-bedroom co-op apartment on Long Island. And it was 900 square feet. It was really small. And you know, when I'd just gotten my 13, and which was nice, you know, but we didn't have the full 25% AUO like we got a year later and all that kind of stuff. And it was hard, you know, making ends meet, you know. I mean, it's just, you know, we're saving 2 or 3% into the TSP was all we could afford, you know. So we agreed we wanted to get out. And she'd been to Texas once before. We'd flown into Dallas and driven up to Oklahoma for my grandparents' like 50th or something like that. And it's green and rolling hills and pretty and all this stuff. And that's what she thought El Paso was. There was no internet in 1989. And because we got there in 90. And so she gets the position and we're all excited. Yay, hey. And we set up our house hunting trip and we're on a plane flying from Dallas. And it's getting a little bumpy. There's spring out there. The wind's going, you know. She looks out the window. She goes, why are we landing? It looks like the moon. I said, well, Ruth, El Paso's in the desert. What? She said, yeah, it's in the desert. And we get off the plane and that wind's blowing and there's some dirt blowing in the air. And she's just like, I tell people she didn't talk to me for a year. It wasn't quite that bad. But she came to fall in love with it.
Did you? So the question is, Did you just want to get back to Texas so bad that you didn't bother telling her what El
Of
Paso?
course.
Good for you.
If I told her it was in the desert, she wouldn't have gone. She wouldn't have put in for it. And if she hadn't come to love it so much, I would still be hearing shit about it today. But she loved it. And it took a year, and it really grows on you. And it's just a slower pace of life. Your quality of life is really good because you can get stuff done. Traffic's not that bad. It's gotten worse, since 1990. But as I said, the fishing was fantastic. Case of work was amazing. She was at Epic, and she got put into a specialized unit where they were going around the country writing books about organizations. And it was a new thing for Epic to do. And they would go out and they would gather up all this information on Chapo. They did a book on Chapo before he was really big. They did a book on Amado Carrillo Fuentes as he was coming up. And I forgot how many books they published. But everybody wanted one because it became their Bible, because it listed it would have pictures of these guys and their bio and what their familial history was and who they were cousins or uncles or aunts to. These were fantastic work products. She got to be a part of that process. She loved it. She did some great travel. They did some really, really meaningful work. And we had really close friends that we stay in touch with to this day, because out there, it was a smaller law enforcement community. It's very much a bunker mentality, because when we were there, I don't know, one in every $6 in the El Paso economy was trafficker related. El Paso has always been a smuggling community, and there's always been a lot of movement back and forth, because you get the border crossing card, and it's not hard to get one of those. It's just, you can come, like if you live in Juarez, you can get a border crossing card without much problem, and you can come across back and forth. People were putting their kids in private school in El Paso. You come across to do business from back and forth. You just can't get past a checkpoint with it, the 26-mile rule. So it's a really codependent relationship between El Paso and Juarez. We used to go to Juarez all the time when we first moved there. We went over the dog races once you say we did it. We went to the Mercado all the time. We'd go over for dinner. It was a really easy process. It wasn't a threat. You go over there, you'd see, young men from the base, running in hordes to the bars and stuff like that, and all that. And it wasn't until later in our tour that it got bad, and where the ASAC made it off limits to us, because as we would take off loads, and they were all Amado loads, because that was his corridor, and they would round people up and kill them and torture them, trying to find out who the snitch was. So that's when the violence really started in the narcotics world.
What year is that?
I think it was Travis Kirkendall, who's our ASAC, who did that. Probably 93, 94.
Okay.
Is when he said, hey, no more going across, kind of thing, guys. If you only go over on official business when we go over en masse, We had a group, I believe it was Group 1, that would work with the Mex Feds over there on a limited basis, and because you're dancing with the devil there,
Yeah.
And, it had a lot of guys in there were native Spanish speakers that, they could communicate and understand what was being said around them. And, they were very specifically planned operations. Not a lot of success for obvious reasons. But they did have that program. But anyway, so we loved El Paso.
So you're working on some pretty good cases, but a couple of things that you had mentioned is you're still working on wires down there, but you start doing a little bit of undercover.
So I had done one undercover before, and it had been back in New York. And it was actually my wife's old group that I had been in. I was now in the city in Manhattan. They wanted a white guy who could speak Spanish to meet this Dominican hitman who supposedly had 10 kilos of coke. Yeah, I'll do it. So I go and I sat with this Dominican hitman in a diner on Queens Boulevard in Queens. And we had lunch. We're sitting there talking. And, he's talking about, getting in these shootouts with Jamaicans down in Miami and stuff. And of course, we're sitting there eating. And of course, he's wearing a heavy it's cold and he's wearing a heavy sweater, and he pulls up his shirt and he shows him his colostomy bag hanging off. He says, I still got this. And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to see that shit. Yeah. Anyway, so I end up doing that UC. The guy delivers, he goes to jail. And he was a second time loser. So I think for that, he got like, that might have been a 20-year count. I can't remember. Anyway, he doubled up. That was back in the early days when they changed those guidelines that kicked in. So I'd done once and scared to death, I'm sure my carotid was jumping out of my neck, and all that good stuff. I got to El Paso and they said, white guys can't do undercover here. Only the Hispanic agents can do undercover. Like, okay, no big deal. I get there and they put me working on the Silmar case, which is the 23 tons of cocaine that they seized out in LA. Jimmy Capper was case agent on it. All that dope came through El Paso, every bit of it. And when they took down Silmar, they did some work in El Paso, and they got most of the organization that transported. They were just truckers, is what they were. There was one guy in particular that was left out. It was their bookkeeper, a guy named Rene Magallanes. And the group that they put me in was working on it, and they said, hey, we want you to help with that. You've got some big case experience. And so, okay. We end up doing the case. That's where I spent a lot of my first year, was working on Rene. We ended up finally getting him rolled and blew open the case. And because he's the one that kept all the ledgers. It was a 250,000 kilogram contract that they had. I'm sorry, no, it was a 500,000 kilogram contract they had, and they'd moved 250,000 kilograms. Mm-hmm. And we had the ledgers to back it up. Anyway, so we did a historical indictment. So that's what I first started doing, until when I said earlier that the hardest move I thought I'd ever had was in New York. No, it was to El Paso and to San Antonio later. As a senior 13, you're coming in like, when you transfer, you're like a rookie again. You don't know any prosecutors. You don't have any informants. Hell, you don't even know where court is, So you're starting over like a GS7, but there's expectations on you because you're 13, right?
Yeah.
So that gave me, I was lucky in that way. And like so much of my career. That gave me that time to get my feet on the ground, figure stuff out, sort of develop a reputation. Working on, for another agent, with another agent, to make a big case happen. And I caught a walk-in informant. And he was from the interior of Mexico. He used to call him Jaime Bond. You got a kick out of that, James. Yeah. And he introduced me. My first good one was the number 2 from Mexican Customs in Juarez, Aduana, and he was a comandante. He was a younger version on the tarmac when the Mex Feds, or the Mexican Army, I can't remember which one, allowed Caro Quintero to leave Mexico after he killed Kiki. This guy had been one of those guys on that tarmac that allowed him to go. He'd been part of that crew. Anyway, so I meet this guy, we do a lot of negotiations back and forth, and so I said, well, I just can't be a West Texas boy here, I got to give him something. So I'm gonna feed him a little Godfather. I had a ponytail, pinky ring, get a watch, dress nice, turn on a New York accent, talk about my Uncle Vito, and I fed them Godfather. These Mexican trackers down there, they couldn't bring me enough dope. So I had this shtick going. But the problem with that is that these undercovers went on too long. I had to stay in my house. I couldn't go out to dinner because, like I said, it's the biggest small town or smallest big town you've ever been in. There were numerous times when I'm up on phones and I'm on my one day off. I'm out with the family. We're going shopping or to dinner, and I look over. There's my that's my target. Oh, there's the surveillance crew on him, and so when I was doing these undercovers, sorry, I'm not going out to dinner. You guys have fun, and that became a challenge because I did a series of these things, and they were all successful. They're taking candy from a baby because they thought they had a mobbed up guy on the hook. I got a cop who delivered to me. Another white supremacist piece of shit who Um, ended up out at his trailer out in the desert, showing me all his guns, and he agreed to come up to New York and kill a bunch of Jamaicans that moved into my family's neighborhood. I was just trying to set the hook on him, and it did. He rolled, and we ended up climbing the ladder. We seized about 700 and something kilos of coke on that deal.
Wow.
But so I was doing the undercover, and yeah, and what that did for me, other than just being a blast, because that's fun, you know, and that's in old DEA, you weren't anybody unless you got to be able to do undercovers. You're not an agent, you know, and which is total horseshit. That first deal I did with the Dominican hitman, my partner from in the city came with me. His name's Jerry McAleer. He retired as a SAC up in New Jersey. Good friend, still talking to him to this day. And I'm stressing about this first undercover, and he goes, "You ever lied to a broad in a bar?" Yeah. Same thing. Okay. So, and that's something that was always in the back of my mind as I'm dealing with these guys undercover. Like, it's just like lying to a broad in a bar, you know? So, yeah, it was what the benefit for me, other than being a blast, was it helped me understand the typical drug trafficker. Most of them, they're not these evil giants, you know, that I'm going to bring dope into this American country to kill people, to do all these bad things. It's about the money. Every crook I ever arrested, you ask them why you did it. Well, I did it for the money. I didn't do it because I want to kill people. I did it for the money. It's an economic crime.
Yeah.
And it helped me understand that. And in doing that, it made me a better investigator on my wires and historical. Like, okay, this is their perspective, you know. It made us more efficient on surveillance because, hey, they got their lives too. You know, they're going to go out and go shopping. You know, they're going to take the kid to the doctor or whatever. And it made me realize that, hey, they're regular people too. And look, how would I investigate me if I want to find stuff out about my life? Where am I going to leave a trail? Where am I going to leave crumbs, you know, that you just have to leave? And it made me an infinitely better investigator because it just gave me what I had not had to that point in time, an understanding of that.
Yeah.
That animal, you know.
Okay, so when you're in El Paso, you start working on the Amado Carrillo Fuentes case, right?
So yes.
Okay, can you explain for the audience who that is?
So I just always, when I refer to Amado, it's Amado Carrillo Fuentes.
Okay.
He goes back tied to, Fonseca Carrillo, way back into the early Federation through an uncle. He was raised to be a drug trafficker, as was his two other brothers. One of which we all later heard about is Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, who took over after him after he died. He had another brother who died. I think he was killed, but he was a guy that got into trying to run a cocaine lab in Mexico. Anyway, Amado, at the time when I got there in '90, was really starting to come on the scene as being somebody in the Mexican cartels. He was very smart. The Colombians loved him. They called him El Humable, the humble one, because he didn't show a lot of bravado with them, and he lived up to his word. Amado was the guy that cut the deal with the Colombians, like, hey, you send me 100 kilos, I'll move for you, pay me 100 kilos. So 1 for 1. And he's the one that set that up, that business model for the Mexicans. So the Colombians are paying off the Mexicans to basically receive their dope and deliver it wherever they want it, for the same quantity. Excuse me. So he gets trained by his second uncle, I'm not sure how far, Pablo Acosta down in Ojinaga, who is a whole nother figure in it. He works to consolidate his power in the state of Chihuahua. He has a few people killed in the process. He's not overly violent. He uses violence when he needs to. And he builds this business model where his organization is actually very, very small. He puts out contracts for bid. Like, okay, I'm going to be receiving X number of hundreds or thousands of kilos in Chihuahua. And he was a big air smuggler. Narcos, they portray him as a pilot. He wasn't a pilot, you know. But he used air smuggling, and he became known as the Lord of the Skies. And it got to a point in the well, I'd say probably about 93 to 97, where he was Mr. Mexico. He was the most powerful. He was the Chapo that everybody knows in this generation. He was the most powerful cartel head in Mexico during that period of time. When I get to there in 90, the cases that that Silmar case, he wasn't a part of that, but he ended up partners with somebody who was later on, and that's one of the guys he had killed. But that was sort of a predecessor to seeing the value of the El Paso corridor, the El Paso Juarez corridor, to moving dope all over the country. So Amado comes up with this business, and he learns it from the Colombians, you know, how they create cells, and his cell doesn't know the other. He takes it a step further, and he'll put it out to bed. I'm going to receive X number of kilos in Chihuahua, and I need services to move from Chihuahua to El Paso. I need services to Juarez. I need services to pick it up in Juarez, cross it into El Paso, and turn it over. I need services to pick it up in El Paso and take it to Chicago, New York, LA, wherever. And then the same kind of contracting process for the money coming back. Money and dope people never knew each other. A lot of times the organizations, the crossers didn't know who the transporters were or who the receivers were. And that one case that I told you about earlier, this port crossing case that we'll talk about, that was just a cell. And their job was to pick up the dope in Juarez and cross it and hand it off in El Paso. That's all they did. And you know, they were paid about 1,000 kilo to do that. Anyway, so he would put it out to bid, and the terms were negotiable. If you would come in and say, all right, I'm going to be a crosser, and I'll cross, and I will guarantee the load, but I want $2,000 a kilo. He would compare that to say, you might come in and say, hey, I won't guarantee the load, but I'll only charge you $700 a kilo. He'd do the math and figure out which one, you know, because he knows what the losses are. And in that kind of role, you would probably win that contract, you know. And he would just put them out to bid, and he would take the bids. So his functional organization was pretty small. People who could actually talk to him. Later on, when I'm doing the historical case, the people that I got to cooperate against him were ones that, hey, his dope that he was having transported or selling to these individuals around the country. So those were the kind of people that I got to cooperate later down the road against him.
So how does your case begin with him?
I didn't know it was him initially. I just kept hearing this, Amado, it's Amado's dope. It's Amado's dope. You know, that was like, oh shit, everybody's dope. Okay, it's Amado's dope. All right, let's move on, kind of thing. And there was that period of time, you know, leading up to about 93. That's okay. So what? Who's this Amado guy? Kind of thing, you know. And I always saw Mexico as a black hole. You send stuff in there trying to get stuff out, nothing comes back. So I really didn't care what happened on the other side of the border. What I cared about was going to happen on this side of the border because I could affect that. So that case, I 93 is when I really started, okay, hey, you know, I did a wire case that involved LA, Chicago, and El Paso, and that was straight up Amado. We got up to an operations officer of his, you know, and did the same thing in the border crossing case, got up to a guy that had direct contact with Amado. But that's as far as I would ever get. Doing my proactive cases out there. Seizing dope, arresting bad guys, you know, seizing money. We rarely seized money in El Paso because it did not stay in El Paso very long. If it spent 12 hours in El Paso, that was a long time. There's a couple of agents later on who I grabbed, like 5 million. It was fantastic, huge record. Probably still stands today, you know. But So I'm working cases, and I'm taking out cells is what I'm doing. Cells on the side of the border that I can impact. And I get to my last one, and I kicked it off in late '94, and it, I'll just mention the guy's first name, Alonzo. He was a cellhead, and they were gangbangers. And their job was to, and I didn't know who it was for at the time when I first started it, was to cross dope. That's all they did was cross dope, and they were real violent about it. And so what I learned as I got into the case, what their MO is they would set up surveillance on the other side, and they would watch inspectors at a particular bridge, and they would look for the lazy inspector who's just waving people through. Yeah, okay, waving through. So then they would target their vehicles to go to that lane. What they would do on the other side when they picked up the dope is they were taking cars, 4-door sedans usually. They'd strip everything out of the trunk, put air shocks on it, and load the trunk with as many kilos as they could get. Oh gosh, well, a Nissan Maxima, I think we took 350 kilos out of once, Yeah, that's a lot of dope in a trunk of a car.
Yeah.
So they weren't trying to conceal it. They were playing the odds to start. And they would get in the line, and if something changed, or if that inspector decided, hey, give me your driver's license, or pop your trunk, or go over to secondary, they would run. They would what they call port runners. And they would speed through the lanes, and they'd haul ass. They were causing wrecks. It made a lot of news. It was getting a lot of press in El Paso. Customs at the time, pre-HSI days, they set up a port runner task force where these were agents, and I knew these guys. They're just sitting up outside the ports waiting on one of these jackasses to run the port. And then the chase was on. And there were bad crashes on those things. There was an instance where these port runners killed a woman and her daughter, on one of their attempts to flee. There was another port runner who died in a fiery crash. Customs was chasing him. There were shots fired at. I mean, it was just a bad scene. And I'm just watching this stuff. I go, okay, I'm glad Customs is dealing with this. I get a walk-in informant. Hey, I know this guy. I know the guy who runs it. Really? Alonzo. He tells me his name, who he is and where he's at. Gives me his phone number. So I start working it up. He says, I can talk to him. Makes a recorded call. Bing. That's me. I'm doing wires in addition to the undercover. I've always got a wire. Not always, but quite a bit at that time. And so the group I'm in a HIDTA group, and it's me, a DEA supervisor, and one of the DEA agent, and a bunch of El Paso cops. El Paso PD, a couple of SOs. We had an INS agent on it, and a DPS, Texas DPS. Anyway, so we said, yeah, let's do it, because we're coming up on the holidays. I'm like, guys, we'll be up on phones Thanksgiving and Christmas. Y'all want to do it? I can wait until after the year. No, let's do it. Overtime, baby. So we get up on the first phone, and it's not Alonzo, it's somebody else, but it's one of his lieutenants. Okay, well, calls Alonzo another phone. I write that thing. We get up on it. 2 calls, boom, he passes it off. I'm like, man, do I have a leak here? That's my first thought, because I saw that happen on another agent's wire where there was a bad leak, and law enforcement leak. And so I'm talking to the informant. He goes, man, he dumps his phone all the time. That's just his thing. And I get a list of phones that I know he's had, and I can see the pattern. So I wrote it up. I got a roving, and it worked. I'd get up on his phone, and he'd use it for a week, sometimes 10 days, sometimes 4 days, pass it off, and get a new phone. We were using, I don't know what you would call it today, but technical means by which we could listen over the airwaves, and we had the court's authorization just to listen and minimize until he had a very distinctive voice. And we found like 4 of his phones that way. And we put this thing up with the antenna on the roof of the federal building, and we had coverage into Juarez. And so, Yeah, I got his new phone. Here it is. I would do a memo to the phone company and tell them, pursuant to this order, turn the switch on. It was the best thing. It was like I was a walking wiretap, man. We did 13, 14 phones, you know. We were up on them for 75 days. We took about 2,700 kilos of cocaine from them. And we did it in a way where they thought it was Mex feds. We'd cover our faces, you know, with the mask and have just generic police markings. We'd do everything in Spanish. And we'd do it with search warrants, just delayed notice search warrants. You'd go and steal the dope and leave. Nobody would go to jail. Nobody got hurt. And it totally fried them. They had no idea what was going on. Alonzo's on the phone to his attorney. Hey, what do I do? She is talking to him, telling him what to do. I almost got her indicted. Anyway, so we go through this process. We seize like 2,700 kilos over the course of 75 days. It's time to take this thing down. I'm fried because we're constantly up and down on phones. We got surveillance all the time because every time they would do a crossing, we tried to get out and intercept it. We only got about 10% of what they did with that 2,700 kilos in that period of time. So that told me this kid had Amado's contract for crossing in El Paso, just by the sheer volume. So you figure that's 27,000 kilos, you know, roughly 27, 30,000 in that range in a 2.5 month period. That's quite a bit of dope. So by this point, Amado and his brother Vicente had called the organization already over to Juarez, and they had done a massive interrogation on them. They brought in Mex feds, and they beat the snot out of these gangbangers, you know, threatened to kill them and all that. And the only reason I know about that is because I had an informant in there that I had caught with 280 kilos of cocaine, and I didn't want to take my case down. It was only like the second thing I grabbed. And I actually caught the kid with the dope, and he ran from us. His brother was an El Paso cop who helped me flip him, and we gave him a walk and put him back into the organization. He was part of the crew that got picked up, beat the snot out of. He had a permanent mark across his nose where they butt stroked him, you know. Turned his life around, though. Became a productive citizen. Really proud of that kid. You know, we had our own little DEA WITSEC that we did for him, and he turned out good. So I decided, Alonzo was scared to death. He didn't know where it was coming from. He was hiding in Juarez. And so on Super Bowl Sunday of '95, I had one of my task force officers, Eddie Gomez, fantastic guy. He was running that machine, setting up in the federal building on not getting to watch all the festivities for Super Bowl. I said, hey, do me a favor, call Alonzo on that phone and just tell him, I gave him the story. Tell him you're the one who's been stealing this dope. And that last one, that 1,100 kilos, is just too much to move. You'll sell it back to him for $2,000 a kilo. And see if he won't do it. No way, he won't fall for it. What do we got to lose? Because we're taking this thing down the next day. And I want him. I got to have him. So he starts the conversation. I mean, I'd already got all my search warrant signed, had my arrest warrants done, everything. And he starts the conversation. And Alonzo's like, bullshit, fuck you. Calls him back. Really? So they do this dance all day long. By about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, he agrees to. He comes across, and we had people set up. We bounce him all over. Yeah, and he tells him, I'm going to bounce you around because I want to see who's with you. And sure enough, he shows up with an army. We got guys that we didn't think we were going to get, that we knew on the phones, but we didn't know who they were, that were with him. And so we had him show up to at about 1 o'clock in the morning to a village inn. And he walks in, and I said, I'm putting the cuffs on this son of a bitch. And I walk in after him, and he turns around, and I said, police. And I threw him on the ground, cuffed him up. And all the other guys jump on the crooks outside. He goes, oh, man, you're good. That's the only thing that Alonzo ever said to me. And so, yeah, he went to jail. We did the roundup the next morning. It was really successful. We ended up locking up like 55 guys in that case. That next morning, we locked up one guy who was a security guard on one of the bridges, and I can't remember the name of the bridge. It's in downtown El Paso, and it's only for southbound traffic. And they put a security guard on it. That's what Customs was doing to ensure nobody was coming back north at nighttime. And this was that guy. Well, Alonzo had paid him off, and he would when they would decide to use that bridge, he would pay Eddie off, and they would come north. That's one of those seizures was that 1,100 kilo seizure that we got. Had used that method. Eddie rolled that morning, and from day one. And I'm not telling you anything. This is on open now, and Alonzo knows it too. So everybody's locked up, and we're going through the trial prep and all that. And Alonzo's calling Eddie for phone patches on his phone, and to conceal from the jailhouse phones who he's calling. He thinks he's concealing. I tell him, hey, just tell him that you can't hang up. It'll break the connection, so he doesn't have an expectation. I said, hit record. I want to record every one of those things and call me when you have them. It was almost daily. We foiled 3 escape attempts that were real. He's going to fake to be sick, take him to medical center, and he had a cousin across who was really violent. He was bringing a crew, come in and shoot it up, kill the marshals, kill the doctors, nurses, they didn't care. Extract him to Juarez. Marshals loved us, we got whatever we wanted because, we were like, hey, this is going to happen again. This is the plan. So we had this in place. Alonzo in January of 96 pleads guilty. And he's pissed about it. And I just knew he pled guilty, because I think everybody pled guilty but one. We had one trial. Anyway, so that was in January. President's Day weekend, I'm at a friend of mine's house for a barbecue. Saturday afternoon, we're drinking beers, hanging out with our families. And I get a call from our duty agent. And he says, hey, FBI just called me. They said they got a guy in custody that says there's a death threat out on you from Alonzo and Amado's organization, because it was all his dope. Really? He goes, yeah, Whip, I think you need to talk to him. So I call the Phoebe. He goes, yeah, I got this kid here. He's saying that they're about to kill you. You want to come talk to him? We got him up in the federal building right now. Okay. So I tell my wife, I said, pack up the kids, we're going. So I take her back to the house. I get my partner, call my boss, let him know. And my boss, my partner, and we go and we sit down with this kid. He's a 17-year-old kid. The Bureau had arrested him for being a wheelman for a bank robbery crew. They went through, and it was making papers. In El Paso, there had been a big string of real violent bank robberies by a crew. They go in and shoot the place up, take the money, and run. Wheelman had a car registered to him, 17-year-old kid. Phoebes figured that one out pretty quick. So somebody finally got a plate, is what happened. And they picked this kid up and they sweated him, and he rolled on this Saturday. And they said, hey, who you work for? He said, his name's Alonzo. He's in prison for a narcotics charge. And he says his full name. And they're, oh, isn't that the guy Whipple locked up? And this kid says, Whipple? Steve Whipple? Oh yeah, they're about to kill him. And they're like, oh, really? So I go, and me and my partner and boss, we sat down with this kid and we debrief him. He knew, he told me the name of the bar, country western bar, that my wife and I would join our friends on occasion on a Friday night. He told me the name of the restaurant that my wife and I had met for lunch a number of times. L&J's, it's a landmark in El Paso. And the game plan. They were setting up surveillance on the federal building there in El Paso. They knew what I drove. And they were going to follow me home to establish where I lived. And then they were just going to, the next day, follow me away, hit and do me at a stop sign. So I'm like, wow, okay. ASAC flew in that night. We briefed him. And his name was Tom Kennedy. He was relatively new ASAC at the time. He says, okay, go home, spend the night, get Ruth and the kids on a plane, send them to her parents up in New York. We'd known Tom when he was in New York. He had been a supervisor. So we did that, and we put a detail on the house because the attorney that Alonzo would talk to lived up the road from me, and she may or may not have known that I lived there, but there was a 50-50 chance she passed my house every day because there's only 2 ways from her house to the main road. They put me in a hotel, put a protection detail on me. The kid told us that 2 of Alonzo's nephews that didn't get arrested in the drug takedown were running the operation on me. Gave me the phone numbers where their shop was. So that Sunday morning after I dropped Ruth off, I sat down and I wrote an affidavit. They wouldn't let me swear to it because they said I was too close to it. I wrote it and my partner swore to it. But I got up on 2 jailhouse phones, the pay phones that Alonzo had access to. The phone in the shop as well as a bug anywhere in the shop. Had approval from Justice that night. Verbal approval was before the judge Monday morning on President's Day. He signed off on it. It was been the same judge who'd been signing all the other earlier warrants, and he was like, "Go get him." Yeah. He was a fantastic judge, Judge Ferguson. Tuesday morning, we were up on the phones by Monday afternoon. Tuesday morning, the Bureau's B&E team showed up. They rerouted them to come. FBI was fantastic on this thing. They technically had the lead, but they shut down their office as we did. Everybody on board to protection details, do whatever was needed kind of thing. It was quite humbling, what they did for me and my family. Got the bugs installed. So remember I have Eddie over here doing the patch calls. So I tell Eddie, so my partner, he's a white guy. He just transferred in. He just come from overseas. He fancied himself as Mr. Undercover. And he wanted to be an undercover hitman. And so I said, okay. So I call Eddie. I say, hey, Eddie, this is what, when Alonzo calls us, this is what I want you to tell him. And I told him, I said, hey, the nephews are planning to kill me. And he got all pissed off. I'll kill those motherfuckers, No. This is what I need you to do, And tell him that there's a guy from LA that you come to know that's looking for me, that I'd made a case out there and it's a mob case and they're going to take me out. And do you want to talk to this guy? Do you want the nephews to talk to him? He, maybe, because the contract was for $75,000 in cash and 75 kilos of cocaine. And see if maybe, this guy would be interested in that contract. So sure enough, Alonzo calls in. He says, hey, let me talk to you about something. So Eddie tells him the story. He says, yeah, absolutely. Give him the nephew's number. So we hook up my partner with the nephews, and they're Dumb and Dumber. And we never got them on the dope case because I don't think Alonzo allowed them because they were stupid. Anyway, so they have some meetings. The prosecutor says, hey, we got to make sure that they're definitely talking about you, Steve. Prosecutor Sam Ponder, best prosecutor I ever worked with. He's just a fantastic guy. Did most of my cases with him. Anyway, he says, hey, have them take a picture of you and then have your undercover say, hey, is this the guy that you want killed? Just so we can prove for sure, take that defense away. Okay, Sammy, we'll do it. So they take a picture of Polaroid of me walking out of some building. Undercover said, hey, this is the guy. This is who I am going to kill. Is this your guy? Oh yeah, that's him. Can we have that? So he says, yeah, here, take it. They gave him a gun, the whole 9 yards. Bad guys gave Eddie a gun, the undercover a gun, and the process is on. So now the takedown is going to be when the undercover delivers a picture of me dead to the bad guys. So the associate SACs had come out for some of this from Houston, because back then El Paso reported to Houston, and that was Ernie Howard. He was fantastic. He was out there for that. So we called my old partner and another former task force officer who now back in homicide at El Paso PD. Hey, can you come out and make a dead scene? Kill me in the desert. Yeah, I'll come out and do that. So we all go out. So I had the ASAC, the associate SAC, my GS, my 2 cops. And we all go out in the desert and they take Polaroids of me getting killed. And man, they were good pictures. Bag over the head, shot to the head, took an ass kicking in the process, all in the trunk, I just all kinds of great pictures. So he picked a couple of them out to give to the bad guys. While we're out there, Alonzo gets on the phone to this female defense attorney. Hey, I keep asking Eddie, when is he going to plead guilty? And he still hasn't pled guilty, he says. I'm a little worried about him because we're doing something. And she goes, okay, I'll check. Call me back this afternoon. We see her leave her office, walk over to the couple blocks away to the federal building, go in, and they're calling me at this point, and because I'm getting all the crap off of me, and I call Sammy. I said, Sammy, this is what happened. Are they going to find out? Because what we had done a week before this happened is we had dismissed all the charges against Eddie because of what he had done for us in thwarting these attempts. He was going to testify in a trial that was going to come up. He'd done everything. And Sammy says, yep, it's in the file. She's going to see the dismissal. We can't hide that. You can't go down there and get it, before she said, no, Steve, I can't. Okay. So I tell the associate, and they sack that. Later that afternoon, Alonzo calls. Don't say anything on the phone. I'll be right over to see you. We see her going to the jail. The case just went away just like that. Got a call later that day from the SAC here in Houston, Don Ferrone. Another one treated me fantastic. He said, Steve, they told me what happened. We can't stop this threat, so we got to move you. And he said, forget about Mexico. We're not going to send you en route to Mexico, because we'd applied for, and we were competitive for positions down in Mexico City. And he goes, where do you want to go? Anywhere you want to go in DEA besides Mexico. I said, well, sir, I'd prefer to stay in the division. Houston or San Antonio, wherever you think's best. He goes, all right, we'll send you to San Antonio. So we end up shutting the case down. He gets sentenced to 28 years for the dope case. They don't use anything of this from the sentencing. So the marshals don't know anything about it. So BOP doesn't. And they're going to send him to Three Rivers, which is right down the road from San Antonio. And so I call BOP. I finally get to the right person. And I'm like, hey, let me tell you a story. So I said, oh my gosh, we can't send him to Three Rivers. He needs to go somewhere bad. I said, yeah. How hard can we do this? She goes, well, I don't know that I can get him into Florence, which is ADX, right? Mm-hmm. But I can get him into Leavenworth. Would that be all right? I said, oh, absolutely. She said, well, will you give me a memo? What? Give me the number to fax it to. And I bang it out, sign it, which I'm sure is violating 1,000 rules, But yeah, they sent his butt to Leavenworth, which I was happy about. FBI went up and interviewed him, and I got the paperwork back on it. He said, yeah, that was me. I did it. I was mad. I'm not mad anymore. It was the crux of the interview.
Is that, because I was going to ask you, when they determined the threat kind of went away, is that kind of when he goes,
Well, so we determined so it was considered resolved by the Bureau. They closed their case because they had the primary case, because they have the primary jurisdiction there. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, he's out now. I drove by. I was in El Paso not too long ago. I saw a fat son of a bitch.
Oh, you've seen him in person?
Hell yeah, I have. He doesn't know it was me. He doesn't know I drove by. I saw him. I know where his place of business is.
Wow.
Yeah.
But do you ever worry about it even to this day, or?
To the point where I'm careful about some things. Mm-hmm. And we'll just leave it at that. Where I take specific precautions, just because this guy was violent. They are a violent gang, and once you're a member, you're a member. Yeah. And that gang's still there. They became integral part of the later wars in Juarez between the Juarez cartel and Chapo. And there was a ground war fought between gangs. They were one of the gangs fighting it. So yeah, no, DEA was happy enough with it to the point where later I promoted as the ASAC, and I went back to El Paso in 2010.
Yeah.
And we were just real careful. We paid attention to what we did. No consequences or anything, no issues. Now, after we moved to San Antonio, the new associate SAC shows up. Ernie Howard, our former associate, had promoted. He was the SAC in Phoenix at the time. And his replacement was a guy I had Snowcap trained with, Steve Castile, who retired as head of Intel for us a number of years ago. He comes in, hey, Steve, how you doing? Doing good, Steve, what's going on? He goes, hey, we're trying to do this historical case on Amado. The AG, he's the biggest trafficker in the United States, and we don't have a good indictment against him. DEA, what are you doing? And so we've ordered an IFR, it's an intelligence file review, on every file that mentions Amado Carrillo Fuentes. I said, well, that's going to be an ass load of them. He goes, oh, yeah. And he says, we got agents sitting there going through that stuff, and it's just not happening. Would you be willing to go back TDY and just base out of there? And you'll be gone for most of the time because you're going to be interviewing people that are locked up. And I'm like, so a historical conspiracy, base out of there. I said, how long do you think? He said, 90 days max. Okay. So I do it. And 90 days comes and goes. And it's really complicated. I ended up with 35 witnesses to testify. We go through this long process, back and forth. We're indicting Amado, his brother Vicente, and then Corral. I can't remember his first name. He was his operations officer. Just 3. And it was a Kingpin CCE statute. And Janet Reno was reviewing it. And she's the one actually ultimately signed off on the indictment. So finally, come June of that following year, almost 9 months, get approval. And so, okay, we set the grand jury up for, was it July 14th or 12th, something like that. Till 9th. July 4th, I get a phone call from the U.S. Attorney in San Antonio, who's another friend, Bill Black, who really did a fantastic job. He goes, Steve, I just got a call from the FBI saying Amado's dead. What do you know about that? And I'm like, Bill, this is a facade. We knew he was trying to get out, and he's been down, and he's sent a crew down to Santiago, and he's buying up a bunch of property in Chile. And I said, get ready. Where are we going to try him? You still need to make that decision. We can't try him in El Paso. It'd be too dangerous. We need to do it in San Antonio. He goes, I think you're right. He said, you really think that's it? I said, this fits because of the information that we were getting that was very high quality, really high quality. And the Chilean said, hey, if he shows up down here, you be ready because we're going to put the handcuffs on him and we want to give him to you. We don't want him in our country any longer than he has to be. So there was going to be no extradition. They were just going to kick his ass out, and we needed to have the Lear there ready to go. And I'm like, man, this is great. I'm going to make some calls. So I start making calls. I'm like, oh, man, this is starting to sound like Amado. So there was an intel analyst, Larry Villalobos, who was down there. And Larry had worked with my wife at Epic as an analyst, DEA analyst. And he's assigned to Mexico City. And Joe Arabit, who was later my boss, was the Mexican agent, was the DEA agent in Mexico assigned to Amado. So he had the Mexico side, I had the U.S. A lot of our stuff didn't cross over. He sent some witnesses that I ended up using for the historical that were really high-end stuff. It was good. But that's where most of our crossover happened. So Larry goes out and prints the body. Larry used to be an FBI fingerprint examiner. And we had one thumbprint from Amado from a border crossing card when he lived in Ojinaga. And he was working for his uncle Pablo Acosta. Larry compared it. Match. Phoebes followed up on that. They did DNA testing, and they also did because back then you could do comparative DNA testing. If you had a subject and a sample, you could bounce them and do a comparison. They also had an agent that was a forensic dentist in the reserves, and they sent him down, and he did his thing, Amado. straight up.
But tell the audience how he ended up dying.
So Amado was planning his exit. He had sent a crew down to Santiago, and we later learned he'd gone down there himself some. And there's some high quality evidence of that too, that just got missed. Otherwise, we would have ended up with Amado in jail. But he was preparing to leave. So he went to Mexico City, to the top 2 plastic surgeons, cutters in the country, 17 blocks from the embassy in Mexico City, and had massive reconstructive surgery on his face, liposuction, all kinds of stuff done to him. So they do all this work on him. They put him in recovery, and he's got his own personal physician. And the 2 cutters, they tell the physician, he's going to wake up, he's going to be in pain. Don't give him anything because you'll dose him. Just don't. You just got to sort of push through it, and we'll manage the pain. Let us do that. Okay. Amado wakes up. What happens? I'm hurting. Give me dope. He gives his own physician OD'd him, killed him. He ended up in a bucket of lye. One of the physicians we know ended up in a bucket of lye, and I'm not sure the other. One came across in San Diego, wanted to cooperate. Wanted, give up, I want to cooperate. We got a call. We don't have any use for him. So they kicked him back across. I think he got shot and killed. And that was Vicente. That leads into Vicente. So this is on July 4th. I'm indicting him 5 days later. I'm like, okay, we got to recraft. We still had enough for Vicente. Vicente is a village idiot. Amado treated him like crap. He would host meetings with high-level government people, other traffickers, and Vicente, gente, bring the drinks, give them drinks, go away. But Vicente liked the wet work. He's a masochist. He ran the torture session on that crew, on that port running case I was talking about earlier. That was Vicente. Bloody, dumber than a box of rocks, but he got off on all the violence. He was the one running the Juarez cartel in the fight against Chapo. When you hear about all these murders that were happening in the late 2000s through 2012, 2013, that was Vicente. He's in jail now. They won't extradite him. You know? And I ended up indicting him. Actually, I went to refresh it, got it signed off. A couple weeks later, we went to re-indict, or to indict to grand jury. The first killing of the war happened when they got Corral. They went into a restaurant and they shot up the restaurant, killed like 7 people. Corral was the target, and they got Amado's operations officer, who was also going to be indicted by me. So now I'm down to 1. So we recrafted the indictment again, got it approval, and I went to grand jury and indicted Vicente. And that's the original. It's been updated since, behind a killing house that happened in the mid 2000s that Vicente ran. The Bureau did a really good job on that, and they came in and they amended that indictment to include that activity. And so, yeah, that still stands. Yeah, that was, 9 months later, and I went home.
Okay.
I went home on weekends here I got to the point where I was going home every weekend.
Yeah.
With my wife.
All right, let's jump around a little bit here. At some point in your career, in 98, you decide to promote. I want to talk to you about, so you become a GS, ASAC, associate SAC. You end up in your career as the SAC of Houston. Why did you decide to promote? Why not stay an investigative agent doing the investigative work? Why did you decide to do that?
Remember I told you what the hardest transfer I ever had was? It's transferring as a 13. I did it again when I went to San Antonio. And it was just like, it kicked my butt.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't, fishing wasn't particularly that good in San Antonio as it was in El Paso. But we decided this is where we wanted to put roots, you know?
Mm-hmm.
We built a home like we wanted it. We liked the town. We liked the people. I mean, we liked El Paso. And they came out with the policy is there's no more mandatory rotations to headquarters. I'm like, ooh, cool. Because I did not want to go back to the East Coast. You know, I want to stay in the great state of Texas. And at that point, my wife was committed to that. And she agreed to it. And to this day, I mean, we're here, right? I got the girl out of New York, but not the New York out of the girl. And I thought, I can still have fun, and I can affect the kind of cases we're going to do. And so I'll be a GS and I'll finish out as a GS, And something much later in life, when I was going down to the border as an associate, we'd get all these new kids assigned out of BA school from Boston and Chicago, going to McAllen and Laredo. And I got into a process. Every 6 months, I'd get up all the new kids I got and bring them into one place. We'd spend about 3 or 4 hours together. And we'd talk about, I'd give them some advice. Hey, this is what you need to be doing with your TSP. You heard it, but you didn't pay attention in BA school because you didn't have time. And talk to them about how I understand the difficulties about you come to the border. I went to New York City, and I know half of you here would rather take a nap, and I get it. But I told these kids, I said, the first 25 years of my career, I was a working agent, I was a group supervisor. I could not believe they paid me to do this job. I would have done it for free. Remember I told you I was going to get out and go to the oil business? That DEA set that hook in me halfway into New York, if not, maybe sooner. I just didn't know it. There was no way I was going to lead DEA. I loved what we did. I loved the camaraderie, the people I worked with. Yeah, we got some slugs here and there, but who cares? But the camaraderie, what we do, the fun, the challenge, I couldn't believe they paid me to do it. Now, when I promoted to an ASAC, it's a different story. They didn't pay me enough because I got too far from the mission, from making cases.
But it's interesting that you're telling me about pulling these new agents aside, talking to them for 3 to 4 hours. I had a couple good SACs over my career, but I very rarely had a SAC like that who really took the time to talk to the line agents like that. Did your leadership style, where does your leadership style come from? Do you look back at Andy and how he was a great supervisor? Where did that come from?
Andy Sherbine, servant leader. Marty Pratt, he was a GS in Dallas, and he retired as, I think he was running Indic. Another one, I was in amazement of the guy. First time I met him, he's a group supervisor. I'm in Dallas working a case with Keith Bishop, and we're both up on phones. Marty is at his desk going through tolls for Keith, helping Keith find the tolls that he needs. That's the servant leadership idea. I had other SACs that were tough, really hard, ones that cared. Ernie Howard was my later SAC. He's the one who promoted me to a 14. He cared about his people, Don Ferrone was the same way. Don was brilliant. He's a brilliant investigator. So I saw those. I saw other SACs who were, Joe Airbutt was tough. He was a hard man to work for, very demanding. A lot of people would call him a prick, but they didn't know him. But he had the biggest heart in the world. If somebody had a problem with their family or something, Joe was going to bend over backwards to make sure you got what you needed. I saw 14s. I saw 15s. Joe Vanacora was my ASAC in New York. He ended up retiring as a SAC in Chicago. And one instance, I'm in El Paso now. And he'd already called and said, hey, you and Ruth want 14s? I'll bring you to Chicago and I'll promote you today. I'll get you promoted on the next board. No thanks, boss. We like Texas. I go back and forth up there quite a bit because El Paso is a huge source, or it was, for Chicago. Big Mexican organizations, right? And it started out with tar heroin and evolved, obviously. I'm up there. Joe had gotten promoted to the associate SAC, and I'm going back up from one of my trips. And I always go in to see the man because he was a fantastic, fantastic SAC, or ASAC for me. And that day he gets announced to be the new SAC of the Chicago division. And it's a Friday evening, and I'm just going up there to work my wire because my crook's up there doing stuff. And I go in and I go to the office, and there's a real ASAC sitting there. Who are you? I'm Steve Whipple. I'm just an agent out of El Paso. Well, he's going to be tied up for a while. He's not here yet. He's on his way from the airport. And I said, okay, sir, I'll just get on the end over here and wait until y'all are done, because he would be really upset if I didn't stop in to see him. Well, how do you know Mr. Vanacora? And I said, well, I used to work for him in New York, and he took real good care of me. And I just want to come and congratulate him and say hello, because I do that every time I come up. Okay. So Joe comes bebopping in 20 minutes later or so. Steve, how you doing? Gives me a big brasso. Walks me in his office. Guys, I'll talk to y'all later. Walks me in his office. I'm like, oh, shit. I just pissed off every ASAC in the Chicago division, you know? That right there, you know, that's something I'll never forget. And I know that agents remembered their interaction with the SAC, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of times that it's a bad because they're in there standing tall for something or something bad happened, you know? And if that's all agents see, you don't get out of the office and you know, then yeah, you don't have that opportunity for them to see, hey, you really care and you know, you want to make things right, you know, as good as you can. I'm going to the border. Very, very few volunteers there. You know, they're conscripts, you know, and they're sent there out of BA school. And the wives are busting their balls and life is hard. It's a Hispanic Spanish environment and they don't speak Spanish. They're white bread from middle America or something, you know, and they just don't, they're not familiar with the culture. And so they're miserable. And so I would spend time talking to them about what this is doing for their career and what it's doing for them up here. Because when you leave here after 4 or 5 or 6 years, because that kept changing on what headquarters policy was and all that. When you leave, you will have done something. If you come down here and you learn how to be an agent here and you succeed down here, you're going to get back home to Oklahoma City and put your feet up on the desk. I'm free. I'm back in civilization. And then you're working for Billy Bob, and Billy Bob's an idiot. Or you see Betty over here get promoted, and like Betty can't find her ass with both hands, or whatever. You see these other people promote, and you're like, okay, I might have to go to headquarters, but I can do that because I did time in Laredo. So I would tell these kids, I'm talking to more future ASACs and SACs per capita right now than anywhere else in DEA there is at your grade level. Because you will have experienced something that's hard. And you will have done it, and you will have succeeded, and you will have moved on, and you will realize that, hey, these other things, man, that's cakewalk, you know? It's about a pep talk, you know? I got to every office, and we have 12 of them. At least COVID knocked the hell out of that. But at least every quarter, sometimes a lot more. I spend a lot more time on the border because of the challenges there. Hey, tell me what y'all need. Man, I get all kinds of weird requests. But I would figure out what I could do. I would do what I did. Every year, headquarters gives a bump to ops, what we call performance bumps, based on how well you did, you know, in the prior year. And it would show up February or March. And we were number one division. After 2 years, then we held it until I left. And I don't know where they're at now. But we're per capita as well as gross stats and on everything that they wanted to see. Complex cases, wires, arrests, assets, I mean, you name it. We led the DEA. So we always got this great performance bonus to our ops account. And so when I was associate SAC, because we paid attention to how we spent our money. So I convinced my SAC at the time, Joe Arabet, I said, hey, Joe, why don't you let me go out? I got this pool of money. Let me see what everybody wants and tell them, hey, we're going to give them what they want based upon this because of what they did. So they should be the ones to get this. Man, that was fantastic. That's probably one of the smartest things I ever did, you know? Because after like 3 years, they're like, boss, there's nothing we need. Could I get chrome wheels on? Because my pickup looks like a government pickup. Dude, it can't buy chrome wheels. But that's the kind of stuff that it would get to.
Yeah.
Because we put a gym in this place, a fully stocked gym, or we did something over here, or I bought extra vehicles, you know, and sent them to an office. And I spent a lot of time trying to resource the border offices because I'd done time on the border. Everybody had done time on the border. The next SAC, Will Glaspie, 10 years in McAllen, and then he went to El Paso. So I didn't get any resistance on that. That went a long ways.
So, Steve, it sounds like you had a lot of great mentors and a lot of people to learn from. How much do you think leadership from you, or maybe you have an idea about this, leadership, uh, do you think it's innate or do you think it's learned?
And there's some people out there that I would follow through the fires of hell, and I'm convinced it's innate.
Mm-hmm.
Me, I had to learn it.
Okay.
You know, I think the desire is there, but the ability to recognize leadership opportunities. I look back when I was a brand new GS. I'm like, oh, I did that. You know, um, so I know there's a big learned element. At least I can say that for myself. Man, there's some others. Like, holy crap! I'm Dave Downing, fantastic guy. He retires a SAC in LA. I think that young man, who's younger than me, I think he was a born leader. I saw him as a new GS in Atlanta, what he did, when he got promoted into Atlanta. I knew him since the day he came on the job, taught him how to ride a wire.
Mm.
And he impressed me on the first day I met him. I think he's one of those innate guys.
Okay.
He might have learned it playing college football, but it comes across as innate.
Yeah. Before we start talking about the hurricane stuff, which I think is kind of end up on those stories because I think it's just really, really fascinating. Tell me in 2012 when you retire for the first time.
Oh,
What happens there? So you decide, hey, I'm gonna go do a job. You get out and you go, man, I just missed the job too much. What happens?
so I'm in El Paso
Okay.
as an ASAC. We got back there in 10. Um, became eligible in 10. Was it 10? Yeah, it's 25 years. And everybody, and having an MBA, I understand money. Like, hey, if it's going to be about money, you need to get out as soon as you can
Mm-hmm.
and go and double that paycheck, right? So I'm starting to look, and like, well, I was getting interviews, and Chevron, boom, they made an offer, and it was a very nice offer. Relocation, signing bonus, just a lot of good stuff. And I'm not part of global security. I'm working directly for the VP of the Mid-Continent Business Unit, which is about the size of DEA. It's 10,000 people. And the VP is their god, for lack of a better term. He's the head. And great guy. And he goes, you're going to work for me because I'm tired of dealing with global security. They're not responsive. They're not doing what I need them to do. They're yes men. And he goes, you'll be here in Houston. You'll work for me. And when you need to travel, we'll put you on the I think it was a G3 or G5, something like that, on the jet, and you'll fly that way, and you'll take care of our security stuff. I take the job, and I give my notice, and I go through all the big pachanga for the retirement thing and the speeches and all that, and I cry like a baby when I get up there and I give my farewell speech, and that was a Friday. Monday morning I report for duty in Houston, and I'm there, and things they focus on are really, I understand why they do, because it's corporate America, but it's not life or death. I just come out of El Paso where we are trying to prevent a very bloody turf war that's going on in the waters from bleeding over into El Paso. And so, we've got gang fights going on in little towns in New Mexico. And because back then, El Paso had become a division. So it was New Mexico and a big chunk of West Texas. And a lot of life and death decisions. I mean, that's what we do at NDEA, right? And they're wrapped around the axle about a smash and grab from a gang truck in Carlsbad, New Mexico, where $400 or $500 worth of tools gets stolen. They want me to hop on the airplane and go out there, track down what happened. And I'm talking to the chief of ops, and I'm like, you realize I know the sheriff and the chief there because that used to be my turf. They've got a war going on between the Bloods and the Crips. They took a report on this. That's all they did. And I can get that over the phone. And so those tools, they're in a pawn shop in Odessa now. He goes, well, that's what we expect. Okay. Now, boom, hit square baseball bat square in the nose. I'm like, what in the hell have I done? So I'm sitting in a class because you got to get a lot of safety certifications. So I'm sitting in that class, and that's the same day I realized I got to get out of this. And I mean, old business, I grew up around, I understand it. I understand the people in it, and it's a huge, important part of our nation. And so I reached out to my SAC, Joe Arabic. Joe, I heard if I didn't ever get a paycheck or cash, if the check hasn't been issued on the pension, you can stop it. And he goes, are you fucking crazy? His exact words. I said, probably, but I made a mistake. He goes, let me see. So he gets on the phone with Diane Filler, who is our number 2. She has a hook over an OPM. They shut it down. He said, send me an email requesting to come back to your old position. I sent it to him. I still have my DEA phone. Because he said, keep it for a couple of weeks until you get settled on your Chevron phone. Because I never had a private phone. I didn't have a private phone until I retired. And so I do that. He says, okay, report on this date. I was gone 2 weeks. And they put me on annual leave. Oh, man, the shit I caught when I got back in the office. I used to have it up on the wall. Somebody in my old office took a picture of Brett Favre that had a caption. I guess he unretired a couple of times and put my face over it and hung it up. And I'm like, okay, bring it on, guys. I deserve this, you know. I mean, when I showed up there, here's your new office. It was a closet, you know, all that kind of stuff.
But you know, Steve, I can only guess, and I've got to imagine it's probably 2 or 3 times what the salary you were making with DEA. You know, you give up that.
It wasn't quite that much, but it was.
But it was significant, right? And you give up that to come back to DEA because it's just.
Sure was.
Yeah. Just a calling, and it's more important than the paycheck.
Yes, that's it. You know, I have been blessed on so many levels in so many ways. We've never wanted for anything once we got out of New York, you know. But it wasn't it was about the money, and then I realized, well, what's wrong with me? No, it shouldn't have been about the money, because money, money can't buy you love, as the Beatles say, right? You know.
Yeah.
Joe Arabic, again, I told you, he's a tough man to work for. He felt for me, and he made this happen. You know, he's the one that made it happen for me to come back. He didn't tell Tommy Harrigan, deputy administrator, or Michelle Lanhart, the administrator, what he was doing until I was back. Then he told Tommy. Tommy goes, oh, Michelle's not going to be happy with you. And I've worked with Tommy in New York. I know him. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
And Joe says, okay. And Joe told me, he said, you're going to be put on the sidelines for a while. Because I'd sapped, or not sapped, but I got an SES score, and it was a good score. And at that point, once you become a 15, why not become an SES kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're looking at what you can affect. It becomes a bigger model on, hey, I'm going to be a GS because I can affect what kind of cases we're going to do and what direction, the kind of work we're going to do. ASAC's a little bit bigger. SES, again, you can mold the direction of what you feel it needs to be done. Of course, you got to feed the beast, you know, on what stats they want, crap like that. But that's all power of the pen.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah.
Feeding the beast, you know. If you're doing the right kind of cases, you can feed any beast coming out of DC. You know, that's easy.
Okay, two last things I want to talk with you about, besides the 2 last questions I always ask. But you come back, Hurricane Harvey hits in 2017, and are you acting SAC at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me what happens. Tell me the story of you're taking you ultimately take a little bit of heat for this, but what happens?
All right. So a year after I left, Michelle thankfully promoted me to the associate position here in Houston. I get here, Javier Pena retires. A few months later, Joe shows up. So Joe's here, then Joe retires. And so it's me, I'm the acting SAC. Will Glaspie had been named in El Paso to come here, and Harvey hits. And it hit Corpus first, and we thought, okay, you know, Corpus they've been through some hurricanes, and then it pops back out of Corpus and button hooks, comes back to Houston, just button hooks on the coast, and it sets up outside of over Houston and then a little bit north of Houston, and just dumps water. It was like, I don't know, 55 or 60 inches of rain in like 48 hours or something. And it's a big flood event for Houston. And we're an island here. We had fish swimming in the street, in my street, and so we're really lucky where I live. We didn't lose power but a little bit one time. We had a small tornado come through and it took some trees down, but nothing compared to what so many people experienced in Houston, with the devastation. So I'm plugged in. I'm in my office, and I've got access through Firebird Anywhere. So I'm plugged in. My phones are working, and guys are sending emails, and they're coming up to, hey, we've got a small team. We're going out doing search and rescue. I'm like, ooh, don't use those words. And it's bothering me because I've already gotten direction from headquarters, from the 12th floor, saying, you don't have the authorities to do search and rescue. You're not covered. You're not legally protected. Do not allow your people to do search and rescue. We are not a search and rescue. That is not in our mission. It is not in our legal authorities. Ooh. They had just recently passed a law, and I think it was as a result of Katrina, where they created a federal response, and ATF was the lead agency, I believe, for this type of an event where they would bring together federal resources based upon a request from the state and local, and the AG would bless it, and there would be deputizations, and only those people sent to that program for that TDY to go and do that kind of support would be legally covered. I can't remember the name of that program. And that was being ginned up for Houston, obviously. And, as time went on, we had guys in pockets all over. I'm like, okay, we got a team over here, that's basically operating off of this island. And it's our SRT guys out there leading the charge. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to keep doing this. We're just going to keep doing it. And I had a real big epiphany at that point for me. I'm sitting there and it's still dumping buttloads of rain. As we call it in West Texas, this is a real turd floater, And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm well beyond eligibility. I'm bulletproof. And what can they do to me? We're going to do search and rescue. And so and some of the water receded, more people came on board. And so we had effective teams going all over the place. Air Wing came and picked me up with a helicopter because I could get to a field that's nearby here. And I could get up and see because they were about to fly in all the heavies out of Florida and the Bahamas to help us move people and equipment around. But the water started receding pretty quick here in Houston. Next day, they flew me down to Corpus, and it was a lake from here to Corpus Christi, which is about a 4.5 hour drive. And it just was one big lake. Got down there, saw what was going on. So I said, hey, we're just going to keep doing it. We had this outpouring of support coming from a lot of the divisions in DEA saying, Colin, Whip, what do you need? What do you need? And people were driving stuff to us, putting trailer loads of stuff. And so we had to sort of create a quartermaster system, at our warehouse. Our warehouse never flooded. So I was able to put a team, and I put my wife in charge of it. She was an ASAC here. I said, Ruth, I need you to go. I'll get you these team members. We need to account for what we're getting. Because in this warehouse, we prepared for hurricanes in Houston long before I ever got here. And it's a process, and we do a hurricane meeting at the beginning of the season each year. All right, tell me how many generators we have, how many are working, do we need to go buy some more, how many chainsaws, all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, we had like 75 or 100 generators, and I would do a lot of stuff in this warehouse. I said, we need to keep track of it because we're going to be pushing it out to people really quick. So we were able to get a crew in there, and they set up a system, and we started dispersing stuff we had. I sent people to go buy stuff we'd get into Home Depot. Hey, sports was it Sports Authority or Academy? It was Academy donated John boats to us. So they didn't give us the motors, but our guys were using us for search and rescue. We had one team pull out a bunch of elderly folks out of a flooded nursing home. They're pulling them out of the second story, putting them. I got pictures of it. I sent those to headquarters, pissed some people off. Putting these old folks on these John boats, getting them out of the floodwaters. So we start getting more and more stuff. And so they set up a big accounting system and they're dispersing stuff. Once we got past the search and rescue, then we went into the recovery mode. And we did Houston Division employees, contractors, task force officers first. We had about 35 homes that were devastated, flooded. And you got to get into that. So when that happens, you get everything off the first floor if it's a multi-floor, and you're cutting sheetrock, pulling insulation out, spraying it with Clorox so you stop the mold. This was August, hot, the nasty waters, cottonmouths, all kinds of stuff in the water, not to mention the mold that happens with the heat. So we went from a search and rescue mode to the recovery mode, and we were taking care of all our homes. Then we moved into any DOJ. We put out the word of DOJ elements. And that's pretty much what we ended up doing as far as we went. We did several assistant U.S. attorneys. We did a federal judge. That federal judge over in Beaumont, those guys are golden forever, But we had people getting harm's way pretty bad a couple of times. But hey, they were able to make it through some rising floodwaters because they had to keep releasing some of the reservoirs because otherwise the dam was going to break. But we just kept pushing through it, and headquarters admin folks were shutting down our expenditures, the authorities. And Will Glaspie helped from El Paso. He would make some phone calls, but the deputy administrator, Rob Patterson, he was a stud in that thing. He fought some major battles. He and one other guy out of chief counsel fought some major battles for us to hey, they have to do these things to get at the Houston Division operational again. And so we were able to fix some of that stuff. And I never had a conversation with the administrator about
it. Okay. All right.
And that would have been Administrator Rosenberg.
Okay. November 2019. You're SAC of Houston at this point. You're the guy that's in charge. And you've got all sorts of crap that's happening. COVID, George Floyd, defund the police. Tell the audience essentially what happens with the Austin chief and what's going on as this defund the police movement is going on.
Can I say something before that?
Absolutely.
Because COVID hit before that.
Okay.
And we all got the order. You will shut down. You're going to put everybody in telework, period.
Okay.
And okay, 10-4 boss. Preston Grubbs. I think he was the deputy at the time. And he's like, hey, shut it down. And he was a war hawk about it. And rightfully so, because we didn't know what this thing was.
Right.
The paperwork, what a pain that thing was. I had to sign every one of them. I didn't. Apparently, it required SAC signature to put somebody on telework. But yeah, so we got everything done in the 2 days. Put everybody out, and I have a couple of stories that came out of that. Two elderly women in our admin unit come in to see me, and they're in tears. Mr. Whipple, can we talk to you? Yeah, come on, Steve, please come on. Because our admin unit is probably the best in the country. And she goes, we don't have any other life. We ride in together, we ride home together. And if you don't let us come to work, we're going to die. And they were in tears. Of course, I'm crying like a baby. And I'm like, okay, so can we make a deal then? Because there's going to be evidence custodians in, because I'm not putting them out, because you have to do your job here. There's going to be a cashier here, and I will be here every day. Are you okay with that? And we promise to wear masks and do all that good stuff because I don't want, if one of you guys gets sick because of this, I can never live with myself. Okay, it's a deal. Never told Preston what I did on that one, because and it made them happy. And I come in every morning, they're all happy. Hey, how you doing? You know, they'd bring lunch in sometimes, you know.
But it just goes, you got to have a purpose, right?
Yeah. These women needed that purpose. They've both since retired, and they get word back to me every now and then from some mutual friends. I just that was probably one of the better decisions I made in my career. Was doing that. The division, I told them, I said, look, you know, admin, they figured out how to make everything happen. Now we had a couple of paper handlers that could bring papers to me to sign if need be. So it worked out really good. But I told the division, hey, this doesn't mean stop working. Productivity in the division went up.
Wow.
Yeah, our numbers went up. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Our numbers went up during COVID when everybody, I mean, cops, they were not, no cops were sent home on telework. And they're like, boss, we got to come in the office. Okay, do what your leadership says you have to do. And if you have to be here, headquarters don't have to know. You know? And that was, we had a big HIDTA task force, you know, that occupied one floor. So of course the DEA agents that are working on those, they can't stay at home when all the partners are working. So that worked out.
Yeah.
You know, but everybody worked and our numbers went up. Traffic was fantastic, you know. I loved it because it was non-existent. But the division really pulled together, you know. We lost a couple of people. One, a very, very long time contractor who used to send me overtime OCDF money when I was a working agent in El Paso. She's a lady here in Houston. We lost her to COVID. You know, we lost some retired folks. We had a soon-to-be TFO. Personal story. So, one of the last things I did before I retired, I had signed off on some new TFO packages to go up for backgrounds and all that. And you know, I read them all, make sure they meet everything right. And I retired, and about a month later, I get a phone call from a high school classmate of mine. He goes, "Hey, Steve, Lynn lost her son. You know, he was a cop in Hayes County." I'm like, "Oh no, what happened?" He goes, "During COVID, they were arresting a steroid monkey who was, you know, all on steroids. He was a steroid dealer, and he fought, and he had COVID, and every one of the guys got sick. And Justin died." And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, man, Justin Speckles, I don't recognize that name. So I called the rack up in Austin. I said, hey, do you know this name? He goes, yeah, boss, you signed off on this TFO paperwork to come be a task force officer. Oh, are you going to his funeral? He says, yeah, we just heard I'll be there. I said, I will see you there. So here is a classmate of mine from high school whose son died and was going to be one of ours, you know. And to this day, I just saw him 2 weeks ago when I went back home, you know, and they're still struggling. They do the cops things for families, and you know, just. But anyway, that COVID was hard on everybody, and especially on law enforcement. But you know what? The men and women of the Houston division really stepped up, and they just kept going, and they kept pushing. The riots, they were challenging, and we had a really diverse response in this division. We had some, like in McAllen and Laredo, they're like, by golly, we're not going to put up with this shit. Will you send your SRT to help us stand the line? Yes, sir. So chiefs of police and sheriffs calling, yep, we're out there helping. And we had San Antonio, hey, do you think you could send us some undercovers to be out in the crowd when they see somebody doing something illegal and nefarious? They'll call a number and they'll vector us in. Oh man, you should see the picture of all these young agents I pulled off the border that looking like protesters. Fantastic process. Here, Houston, Chief Acevedo, he says, hey, just do us a favor, send troops out and look for piles of rocks, you know, and you know, help us, you know, remove those from the streets, you know, and just run your informants, you know. I mean, we really varied, and you know what? Everybody was cool about it, you know. You had political beliefs on both sides of that. In the division, you know, and I just told people, I said, hey, we're going to put all that stuff aside and we're going to do our job. We're going to support our law enforcement partners. when they ask us to, and we're going to protect our facilities. That's our two missions here. And I said, you know what? It's not productive to get in arguments about any of this at work, you know. And it worked out. You know, the division stepped up and did what we needed to do, and we didn't have any problems.
But what happened in Austin?
So Austin, they say keep it weird in Austin. Well, it's gotten weirder over the last few years because we've got this. It's the Texas tech corridor from basically San Marcos to Austin, a little bit north of Austin. I mean, Tesla's moved in, right?
Yeah.
Musk has moved his whole operation there. And that's been an evolving thing. So we've had all this money coming out of California, people that are coming with tech jobs and selling these multi-million-dollar houses. And they realize, oh, I can buy a ranch down here for that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, they bring their politics a lot of times with them. And so it's made Austin's always been a liberal bastion in the state of Texas, but it's gone even further, more liberal. And I'm not even calling it blue because it's always been blue. We have blue parts of the state of Texas. But it's just the really far left stuff. So they have a mayor and a city council that gets elected. This defund the police thing starts happening. And guess what the city of Austin does? They knock the chief's budget by, I don't know, 35 or 40%. And they say, you're not going to do narcotics anymore. And you're not going to do traffic stops. And you're not going to do this. You're not going to do that. And so I get the request, hey, we've got 20-something narcotics officers. Would you be willing to deputize them and take them on over at DEA? And could you please work some narcotics in the city? Because he knows what our view is in DEA. I said, absolutely, 100%, we got it. Send them, we'll make the room, and we'll get the process started. And yes, sir, we do work narcotics in Houston, and we will continue. We'll even add more effort there, you know. It just so happens right after that, I have a board meeting at the HIDA in San Antonio. And because we have two HIDAs here, one sits in Houston, one in San Antonio. San Antonio is a border HIDA, but it's expanded because Austin got in before I ever got here, and they smoke everybody on their stats, you know. So they reluctantly give Austin money because they just do that much for all their dope comes from the border anyway, and it's real contiguous, especially Eagle Pass corridor. So I go in for 150 grand extra because we got a slush fund there. That's not the right way to put it, but it's funding. We got a pot of money, and most HIDAs have it where they can allocate special projects. And because every year, not everybody spends everything, and if you don't, and you can't allocate it, you can give it back, and it goes in this pot, and it's all multi-year money in HIDA. So I go in for like $150. I'm going to buy some desks and do a little bit of work inside the office to create this space. And I sat there, and they put it on the agenda. And the director there is a retired DPS. I think he was a regional commander. He might have even been narcotics commander. Anyway, good guy. And he said, "Oh yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah." I said, "Okay." So it comes around to my turn, and I speak. Hey, this is what it's about. This is what I'm doing. You know, I got this request from the chief. And you would have thought that I shot the Pope. I had 3 attorneys, 2 elected DAs, and 1 assistant U.S. attorney come at me like, who do you think you are circumventing the will of the people in Austin, Texas? Like, whoa, I'm not doing any of that. I got a request for assistance from the chief of police. And that's what we do in DEA. When we get asked for help, we get it, you know? And if you come to me, DA so-and-so or DA so-and-so, and you need help, we're going to give it to you. That's what he's doing. And man, they went off and everybody just went. And I said, you know what? Because I'm watching around, half of them were on Zoom, half of them are sitting at the table, and I'm watching who everybody's thought saying, hey, that's a great idea. Just got damn lawyers, you know? So I said, never mind. I'll just fund it out of my own division. I'll take it off the table. At the end, all these guys go, I'm sorry, Steve, you know what? They're doggone it. They're wrong, you know? And hey, we'll put it back on the agenda. I said, no, guys, that's okay. We got this. We'll take care of it in-house. But that just fried me that they had such a harsh reaction to a law enforcement agency looking for help to protect their own citizens.
Right. Right.
And these people didn't see that.
Yeah. So how is it that you're going against the will of the people, but yet the chief of police is that it boggles my mind. That's
Oh, hi. I'm just sitting there like, where does this come from?
yeah.
But yeah, that I've been around Haidas. I remember I was sitting out on surveillance in New York with my partner when they announced this new Haida program. I'm like, oh, cool. Here they are talking about what we're doing in New York. And New York was going to be one of the Haidas. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But El Paso, when I got there, that was a Haida group, and we were Haida funded. And so I've sat on multiple boards, been on multiple task forces. I've spent a lot of my career in task forces, especially Haida task forces. And fantastic program. And it's a great funding program. It's a great way it brings people together. You know, there's some challenges here and there, but they're given a lot of local autonomy, which is really cool with the way that their business model works. And the boards, I've never had a bad experience with the board till that day, and that was my last board meeting.
Wow.
That was a shame.
All right, 2 last questions for you, Steve. Can you look back? How did law enforcement affect your family?
Oh, well, it takes you away. And obviously the death threat was it was an upheaval overnight, literally, for my family to pick up and move. And when you're bitten by the bug and you're chasing a bad guy, and that adrenaline, we're all adrenaline junkies, you know. It just, everything, you get blinders on and everything fades. And my family paid the price. I'm blessed more than I can ever appreciate that. My family stayed together, that we made it to the best of my abilities otherwise, you know, but that's through the strength of my wife and my children's mother, that we made it, and to drinking age, as they say, you know. But no, that's looking back, I've made decisions that I would take back today, and I've told that to my family. And there's some real specific ones, like agreeing to go chase Amado around and do that historical. I wish I hadn't done that, because look what it ended up with. You know, he was going to pay the ultimate price, no matter what. But because that one took me away a long time. When I went to Houston and promoted to be a 14, my family stayed in San Antonio because my wife she promoted before I did. She was a 14 in San Antonio. I was there about 6 months. Ernie Howard was the SAC. He promoted me. And I went in and said, hey, this is too hard on my family. And I asked for a downgrade. He says, actually, it was about after 4 or 5 months. And he says, give me 30 or 60 days. He orchestrated a promotion and a lateral transfer, people that were wanting them, to create a hole to put me back into San Antonio and to keep me at grade. And to this day, I would take a bullet for that man, you know.
Stevie, you got married super early on, and I don't think I've spoken with anybody as of yet. I'm like 80 some interviews in. I don't think I've talked to a husband and wife team that is law enforcement. I could be wrong. How do you think that either helped or hurt? I mean, she understood the job, but she had enough common sense to go quit doing that. I mean, how do you think that dynamic worked for you?
You're right. She understood the job. And that's what all the guys say. Oh, you're lucky. I'm like, yeah, but she can see through my bullshit too. You know, I know what you do when you want to go out drinking with the boys. You say, hey, honey, I'm working surveillance. I can't do that. I tried that once and I got caught. She called base. Hey, is group 23 out? No, ma'am, they're not. You know? So she can see through the bullshit, which helps keep me in line.
Yeah.
And she's got the patience of Job. She has to be married to me, because I'm a class A prick at times, and I know that. And um, and I can only imagine it's got to be tough to be married to me, but she's tough. You know, she's a New Yorker, and she's not shy about kicking me in the nuts because I've earned it usually. Sometimes I don't, but
Okay. Last question for you. Can you look back on when you started to now? Has your views on people and society changed?
oh, absolutely.
In what way?
Um, and it's something you really got to work at, not to become too much because it becomes an us and them thing.
Mm-hmm.
And some places it becomes even more so. El Paso really got that way because it was such a bunker mentality, and in the '90s it was such a flood of trafficking, and and the volume of cases, and people lying to you, and you if you're not careful, you only want to see the bad sides, and driving down the road, you see some idiot do something stupid, and you draw the immediate conclusions. Well, that's an idiot, and it makes you hyper vigilant, to 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 crime. Our kids grew up that way, knowing that hey, you pay attention to your surroundings. There were restrictions on them that other kids normally wouldn't have just because of our jobs, our work, our perceptions. Um, and they will tell you that to this day. Um, it convinced me we're a nation full of sheep. You know, Colonel Grossman put it really good with the sheepdog and sheep and wolf. We brought him. I brought him in multiple times in this division. Saw him in Atlanta first time, and um, and people were not aware that people are good nature by, I guess, their nature is to be good. You know, and there are bad people that their nature is to be bad, but as a whole, human nature is good, and they tend to see the good in people. Um, when there's a lot of bad out there and they miss that, and that's when you end up being a victim, you know? So I guess a lot of us in law enforcement, retired law enforcement, um, we might go to the other extreme. Yeah. And I'm one of those, and I have to keep that in check when I can.
Steve, thank you for the interview. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.